Om Sadanga Yoga Natu Naiva Shudam Mano Vinasham Natu Naiva Shudam Guru Padesham Natu Naiva Shudam Swayam Cha Evam Swaya Cha Tattvam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The Atman, the self within, is not made pure by the practice of the six-limbed yoga. It is not made pure by the quieting of and destruction of the mind's vrittis or thoughts. It is not made pure by bowing at the Guru's lotus feet. It is ever pure, beyond inception. And that self is Brahman. So there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. And may that Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings, or the world. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So we are gathered here at Kedarnath, our center on the Big Island, one of our two centers here, to take up this chalisa, these 40 verses from the Avadhuta Gita, this great Nondual scripture, sort of paired off with the Ashtavakra Samhita. Those two are specifically close to one another in content and non-dual teachings. One of those in which Sri Ramakrishna kept close to him. And he wasn't much for books, didn't need them, of course, but he had Swami Vivekananda, Narendra at that time, his pre-monastic name, Lord of Men, had him read from the Ashtavakra Samhita when he was young, to maybe cause his memory to remember that non-dual truth that is so easily forgotten by denizens of the earth when they come through that curtain of nescience or cloud of unknowing that separates them from the earth plane when they pass from the body in their last lifetime. We might look at a little bit of that today in a chart I have called Palette of Future Births, like a painting that you would do from a painter's palette, how you would be able to create a beautiful painting. And that's the way people are doing with their lifetimes. Of course, we hope they're all beautiful, as Vivekananda said, that we would hope that we would never be born here again, not in ignorance. But these successively higher and higher bursts of deeper and greater understanding are very favorably looked upon by the seers. And that's a kind of progressive freedom. They talk about krama mukting, and that, as Holy Mother mentioned, that perhaps a man does a little mala practice, japam, in one lifetime and advances, and then doesn't quite reach the goal. The next time does a little more practice and advances further, and this way goes on to the goal. So when we're talking about the Avadhut, of course, we're talking about somebody who's far past the need of practices and is there at the goal and has come back for some reason, we hope, to help us. And it's already proclaiming, because I chanted out of that scripture just now, Sadanga Yoga Natu Naiva Shudam. Guru Padesham Natu Naivashudam, Mana Vinasha Natu Naivashudam. Just Shudam means pure, Natu. It isn't made pure. So it's not made pure by bowing at the Guru's feet. That's a bhakti path that you're talking about. It's not made pure by destroying the mind's waves in meditation. That's a Raja path you're talking about, the kingly meditation path. And it's not made pure by the Sadanga, six-limbed yoga. That's what you're talking about there is yoga, in particular Patanjala, eight-limbed, calling it six-limbed at that point, because yamas and niyamas have already been well learned. There's hopefully ahimsa and truthfulness and non-covetousness, asteya and sacham. Those things have already been learned by the soul, and so they hardly even count in as a limb to those souls who come here. And so basically in Vedanta you talk about sadanga, or even 5 centers, starting from the region of the heart and then moving up to the throat and third eye. And that's how somebody already advanced in yogic practice would begin their lifetime. They would recall immediately what they learned in their past lifetime. Because things like aparigraha, non-receiving and non-giving, had already been mastered by them in a previous lifetime. So they weren't out to get things from this universe. In other words, they already knew innately that this universe wouldn't satisfy them. So that was one of the early limbs of yoga, that you have this understanding that you're not here to possess things or own things or covet things or try and get pleasure from them or gather wealth. And other religions talk about that too. Jesus mentioned that as well. So in that way, when you talk about the Avadhut, you immediately go to this higher or non-dual frame of reference that beings like that live in. And so 2 weekends ago, was it, we met here for the 6th class on this series of classes called Jnanamritam Stotram, or the teachings of the Avadhut, in those 40 verses in chapter 3 of this scripture, which all end with Jnanamritam Samarasam Gagano Sky Pamoham. I am like. So I am the nectar of bliss, boundless like the sky, and unaffected like the ethers. So these 40 verses end every time with these. And so we have Avadhut singing this refrain to us every time. And so 2 weekends ago, because we skipped 2 weekends because we had a seminar and a retreat. So we're always busy with that kind of deep study of scriptures and going after the prize, not just assuming that it's there because you've heard that you're perfect by nature, but actually putting yourself up against the perfection that you know is there, cutting yourself in the image. We were actually talking about that at the recent retreat. And so you find something perfect and you put yourself up against it, sort of like a mirror, as it were. And if a mirror has some problems with it, cracks, dust, whatever it is, the mirror of your mind that is, then you go about removing those so that you get the best reflection of your true nature through that purified mind. So that's why the self is not made pure by practice. It's not made pure by all of a sudden, I can stop the thoughts of my minds now. Always sort of objected to that jump to position of the second sloka or sutra of yoga, Patanjali's sutras, when they said, yoga is attained by stopping the mind's waves. I was able to stop the waves of my mind when I was young, and I never fell right into yoga by doing that. So you have to practice a while with that quiet mind. It has to become as habitual to you as your thinking mind was to you before you made practice predominant in your life. Because the mind changes all the time, Holy Mother said you have to sit and watch the gunas come and go. And the Avadhut has already told us, I found out when I did that tamas, drives people, human minds, and rajas drives the universe, the activities of the universe. I found out that I am not tamas and rajas. I withdrew from them. And so now he's mastered the gunas. That's called Trigunatita, name of one of the great direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Trigunatitananda, who came west too to help us with Vedanta here. So that self is not made pure by any of those avenues. However, some people will hear that, and then they'll think, oh, I'm already pure, I don't need to practice. So of course, that's where we object, stand up and object. We object to those pseudo-spiritual entrepreneurs who are calling themselves world gurus, who have thousands of followers and who are just pulling the wool over the eyes of all thousands or hundreds and thousands of them, like teaching them things silly like levitation or longevity of body. Oh, you can live 700 years. It's all over when you look at the internet and when you go looking at teachings that are going on. So there's a message to all of you out there who are trying to fool the people for the sake of money, is that we see you and we're not in step with you whatsoever. You have to practice these 4 yogas and you have to surrender yourself to a high ideal, and then you become humble. You don't become arrogant, and you become small in stature, not great, the great world guru and all that. Those beings are rare. So we look to Swami Vivekananda when we want to think of somebody who's so great. Sri Ramakrishna said that he actually transcended the net of Maya. And all of other Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, as great as they were in spiritual stature, became so small, they took the route that they would fit through the chinks in the curtain of Maya. So that's how you deal with this ego, so that you don't end up with a spiritual ego. You certainly don't want a worldly ego, but a spiritual ego is almost more pretentious and more damaging, because people sometimes cut their teeth on the world. But you can't get to the infinite through the finite. So pretty soon they realize, I can't keep owning things and telling people, giving people this path of boga, masquerading for yoga. Boga means enjoyment. So you never saw great souls doing that, or writing autobiographies on themselves and things like that. The ego wasn't there in these kinds of cases. They were there just to help you. The 4 kinds of qualifications of the teacher were there. Shankara taught that early on. Akamahata, Shrotriya, Abhijna, Brahmavitma. So when you become aware of the teachings through the guru who has these 4 qualifications, and then you realize that that's the truth, and then these practices that you undergo remove the dust and specks from the mirror of the mind. And then you can see, if you want to say at that point, I am nothing. I am nothing. That's the neti, the goal of neti. All these qualities and attributes exist in the great self, but they don't exist in the small self. They become expanded into spiritual egos. So the Avadhut is one of those who definitely made it through that problem, that risk. And now he's teaching us through these beautiful verses of his, the pure non-duality of the matter. See, this is Advaita Vedanta we're talking about here. You'll see that, on the back of the book and so forth, when they put notes like that. This is a treatise on the purity of the Advaita Vedanta. It's so rare to find a scripture that has everything trimmed off of it like that. As great as the Bhagavad Gita is, there's a lot of other information in there that's moving along the lines of helping people of the world, like Arjuna, move through the path of honest dualism, where God and mankind may never meet, as one, like in Advaita, but at least God exists for mankind, and they bow down to it. So that's an honest dualism we're talking about there. instead of an atheism or something. And then the qualified non-dualism, where Krishna is giving out great teachings. And then every once in a while he'll throw in some beautiful gem like Nabhavo Satcha, Bhavo Nabhavo Navidyate. Bhavo Nabhavo Navidyate means abhava, sort of like the Avadhuta Gita here, when you're saying about, the self's already pure. So in Krishna's case, he's saying that the self is real, and it's the only reality, and the non-self never existed, so you don't even really have to worry about it. Asat vidyate, he says, bhavo nabhavo vidyate sataha. And then ubiyor api drishantos tu anios tattva darshibihi. The great souls have had darshan with both sides of that. They've had darshan with the living reality, and they've had darshan with prakriti through their meditations on things changing. And so they can draw back and say, I only saw the reality in the end. I didn't see anything unreal in any of it. So the beauty of the non-dual teachings there, like from Gaudapada's Karaka and so forth, become very pronounced and act as a, I might say, kind of a manual for souls, a map where the terrain has become so elevated that there's no trails anymore. Sort of like you find a path to the mountaintop, and then there's a plateau on the mountaintop and some forests. There's nobody ever went up there and drew a map of that. See, it wasn't drawable, it wasn't explainable, it wasn't describable. The Upanishads say that. So nobody could ever send back a map of what I'm seeing up here. Like a man writing home to his parents, send me this, send me that. They write to him and say, okay, but bring us this from that high mountain place where you're at. Bring me this, bring me that. Bring it home with you when you come visit us. And write it to a letter in him, you see. So then a man's time for the man to go home, and he can't find the letter. So I don't know what to bring him from here. See? So he has to rush around and have people help him look for this letter that came from home, so he knows what to bring back. So those things that are of a transcendent nature, or maybe you could say that one thing that's of a transcendent nature, is indescribable, and it's not something that you can carry around with you and share it with people back home, as it were. They'd have to come to you. And so that's why holy company is necessary of that kind. I've got every vision I want from you, the Father, King Himalaya said to his daughter, who is the Divine Mother incarnate. I've got every vision, thank you, now give me non-duality. Sorry, Father, I can't do that, she said. You have to live in the company of an illumined soul to get that. So you're going to have, in order to get that transmission of what non-duality is, because it can't be spoken, it can't be written, and can't be communicated, it can only be transmitted. And that's why the company of being in the company of somebody who has, like the Avadhut, proven to all of us that he's dwelling at that very rare air of non-dual heights, spiritually speaking. Breathless air of heights, the Chinese poet writes. See, he got up there, then could hardly breathe. It was so beautiful, and you were so high up that the rivers looked like just little tiny things twisting on the ground far below. The forest just looked like a little patch of green. So everything was seen from this transcendental non-dual position. And when we took that up with verse 13, 14, and 15, it was all samsara. Each of those verses we sang 2 weeks ago in class. Samsara santati lata nachade kadachit. Santosha santati. Then next verse, sansara rajo nacha mi vikaraha. Santapa. So sansara is all about rajas and tamas, basically, is what he was saying, so you remember I created that chart for you that was brand new at the time, that it had the title of People's Attraction to Samsara. They had attraction to rounds of birth and death. They have an attraction to coming back into the body. And then getting caught on that wheel of birth and death. So we had those teachings about samsara. Why do people get so attached to embodied life on earth? For all those reasons of suffering and ignorance and unfulfilled pleasure and attachment to things that aren't real. Not asat vidyate bhavana bhavo, as we were just saying. And then further, Holy Mother says, wow, one of the most amazing things that she saw was that when they did get attached to that, they didn't learn their lessons, not to do it again. And so this is this attraction to samsara over and over again by souls who are not learning the lessons taught by the authentic guru when they're there, and from the revealed scriptures. You have to talk about those truths to people, get their attention, talk with them truthfully. It's not about all these phenomena around here that you have to sit and talk about for hours with people so that you make yourself look good or something. You have to sit them down and get their attention and say, now we're going to focus on this truth of existence called Brahman. First of all, there's 10 or 11 different things about Brahman I want to tell you from the scriptures, the Brahma Sutras. Now, let's talk about these. And then let's talk about all the qualities of Brahman that we talked about when I showed you this chart. When I first created it, when we started this series some 8 weeks ago or more, because there was another mainland retreat thrown into the mix. And we talked about the myth of creation, how people are, one of the reasons why they'd be circling on this circle of birth and death, samsara or kala chakra, was that they believe that they're being created and they believe that they're dying. And so we talked about that at the retreat too, over the last 2 weekends, and the seminar as well. Had a new chart for the seminar as well. All these reasons why people see nature, take it for being separate from themselves, rush to unite with it, but all the time they've forgotten that nature was a projection of the mind. So that's why we go to the Mahat and meditate upon Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and the great avatars that come out of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Because then we meditate upon them and we're connecting with the cosmic mind. And the cosmic mind knows much more than the individual mind. And it must know much better than the collective mind too, since the collective mind, Lord Buddha said, the mind of the ancestors is what's recycling back to earth all the time and dying and then going to a so-called heaven, Bhur Bhuva Swaha kind of thing. And so they're always recycling and having a repeated birth and death and ignorance. But if you go to the Avadhut, he's telling you everything that we've chanted about for these last 15 verses. And they all sound very much different than something about transmigration. In fact, when he mentions it, samsara, he says, well, I realized that that's driven by tamas of the individual mind, the rajas of the collective mind. You know, people come here and they could live happy little lives, but they're still tamasic. It's not tamas. That's not like tamas is just some sort of lethargy, through which you sleep all your life. It's inadvertence to taking the teachings. You're asleep to the teachings. You could be very active and be tamasic as far as the spiritual, the luminaries are concerned. Well, they haven't actually begun to unfold the Kundalini yet. See, they haven't even set foot on the first limb of yoga yet. They haven't learned the first truth of Vedanta yet. But they're happy and they're rich, and they're living nice little studies of lives. But spiritually speaking, they're tamasic. So it's not like we just can't say tamas. It's just some sort of a lethargy that comes over us and makes us sleepy, so that we can't pay attention in class or something. actually, if you can pay attention in class and in meditation, you can get over your lethargy and your restlessness, then you've pretty much attained to a high state that it proves to the mind that you can be focused, that you can sit like this for 50 days if you need to, like Buddha did, and you can breathe and open and awaken the prana inside of you. And that prana can connect to your mind, and the psychic prana can unfold. And then all that creativity that you wanted all your life is all of a sudden just like nature. It's inside of you. It's not like when you separate yourself from nature, all of a sudden you say, oh, finally, I realized I'm different from nature, and then nature's within me. But now I have to do the same thing with the mind. I realized that all creativity is in the mind, and I'm different than the mind. So he already sang one verse like that. It says, you don't understand. It's not being far from me or near from me that's the point, and it's not being creative or destructive that's the point. I have a mind, and I can turn on its thoughts, and I can turn off its thoughts. You remember that verse we sang about that? So it's not like he's for or against anything. The non-dual state is like that, even in terms of other paths and other religions. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't be chanting in here, Sadanga yoga natu naivashudam, right? He's mentioning yoga and its practice. So when you go to the Vedantas, particularly the Advaitists, they're like, oh, yoga, that's okay, you know. It's like, ho hum, I got over that a long time ago. I'm balanced. You know, I don't really need to do yogic practices anymore. And that cannot be feigned, as I was just saying earlier. It has to be attained, not feigned. So when you attain it, then you smile, you see, down at yogic practice. That's what the Vedantas do. But their path is the Vedanta, see. Vedanta Siddhanta Natu Naivashudam. See, if you want to say that, you cannot make the Advaita Vedanta or the Vedanta pure. It's already pure. See, so that is a perspective more than a path. It's a principle more than a religion. It's non-denominational, and so you set your course by that. By the axioms of Advaita Vedanta. So all of this is by way of trying to connect us back to 6 other classes we've had, evidently, and this must be the 7th, I've been told. So let's chant those verses that make up this study for the next hour, 45 minutes, that are actually number 16, 17, and 18. So we've almost been taking 3 verses every class for these past 6 classes. I think early on we took the first 2 by themselves because they're so powerful. When it came to those verses, it said, I'm the fire that burns the sins of that being who is without sins. We stopped because that's such a beautiful statement. And we want to know more about that. I'm the fire of intelligence, consciousness, that's like the sky, infinite like space, that burns the bodies of that one who has no bodies. So that this is the non-dual way of saying things that attracts us to Advaita. Say, what? I didn't quite catch that. Will you say that again? See, so it's got a hook to it. It's got this hook that attracts people beyond duality and qualified non-dualism. As a perspective in the world, probably qualified non-dualism is the best. Sri Ramakrishna liked that because from them he could share teachings with people. He could share his experiences of samadhi with people. He could even share his experience of non-dual samadhi with them. I know I just said that it's not describable, but how about this? I was a salt doll and I walked into an ocean. They asked him, what is your non-dual samadhi like? Well, I felt like a salt doll and I walked into an ocean. He had to think for a long time to come up with that description because whenever he talked about non-dual samadhi, he went into it. You know, that's how susceptible he was to Brahman. Everything's soluble into Brahman, and Brahman is everything. And I love Brahman. So when you see someone you love, you become speechless. You don't know what to do. You're like a nervous little kid. So, the avatars, when they approached the non-dual Brahman, they're just like as amazed as we are, but probably sans the fear. They don't have the fear. They're like, and so here's another one. I felt like I was a goldfish that was just released from a bowl. So householders had this goldfish and lived there for years in that house. They had to move. They couldn't take the fish. They go out to the lake and the fish gets freed. See? So this is how he would talk about these experiences that are inexplicable and are untenable to some people, like intellectuals and materialists, see, and not understood by pseudo-spiritual charlatans and so forth. They just feign their understanding of it, pretend it. Ask them to levitate, they can't. That's what they're teaching. So this is a way of speaking non-duality, and the Avadhut has his own special way of doing that. I felt like a bird that soared so high, into the Mahakasha, he said. So there was another space beyond the Chittakasha that he's talking about, and he calls it the Mahakasha. It's where his mind soared like a bird. And like Buddha in Nirvana, lost for days. Like Christ in the wilderness, lost for days. Like Holy Mother when she first had her samadhi in the body in this lifetime, lost for days. Intoxicated, drunken, and so forth. So by mere reference, the Avadhut told us about samsara last time. This is sort of like one of those serials you were watching when you were a kid in the West, right? Cliffhangers and so forth at the end. Oh, I can hardly wait. He got run over a train. He's dead. And then you find out somehow he slid off the tracks at the last minute. So that's what you're like here when you're taking long class series of Atmagyan with a guru from an organization in a tradition like Vedanta. You want to find out what happens next. So he referred to samsara, and we looked at how people were so attracted to it. Now he just shifts. It's in the verse 15 to verse 16. All of a sudden, he's going from samsara to niskampa. And niskampa means, it's got several meanings. The best meaning for this is reduced. It's just reduced. So in niskampa, you cannot really reduce Brahman into sections, separations. So you can see in samsara, somehow Maya succeeded in doing that, right? Apparently, people by the billions believed in it ever since this cycle, last cycle. So they're all rushing to it because of its divisions. I'll go to that world, I'll go to this world. I'll have that variety of food, I'll have that variety of food. Like Buddha says, I'll go to that high mountain in the winter season, and in the summer season, and in the winter I'll come down to the plains where it's warm. So they're always shifting back and forth like this. And but after he says, well, that's the tendency of people to do that in bodies on the physical world. But actually, if you ask me, Brahman is niskampa kampa nidanam. Navikalpa kalpam is the first line of this verse. So it's beyond the imagination's vikalpa, that's based in desire for people to enjoy divisions. See, niskampa. It cannot be reduced. That is, it can't be put into sections. Like we walked out of the open sky, half hour ago, and now we're in a little house, you see. And you couldn't do that with Brahman. You'd have to be a salt doll and give yourself up in order to know that Brahman is without divisions. And you're not able to reduce it to any kind of compartment. You can't compartmentalize it. So he sings like that. Niskampa kampa nidanam, navikalpa kalpam, swapna prabodha nidanam, nahitam hitam hi, nisara sara nidanam, Anahitam hitam hi Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Navidya veda kamidam nachahetu tarkyam vachamagocharamidam nachahetu bhuti evam katam hi bhavata katayami tattvam jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham nirbina bina rahitam paramartha tattvam antabahir nahikatam naparam parami prak sambhavan nacharatam nahi vastu kinchit jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So in his inimitable way, he sings about this non-dual Brahman and its indivisible nature. And in the English, it would read much like this. Stillness and vibration, along with doubt and determination, disappear in the ultimate Brahman. So does the duality of virtue and vice, thus morality and immorality as well. Even the waking state and dreaming state dissolve there. All along, I am pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. You ask about Brahman? How can I speak of what transcends speech and its words, mind and its conceptions, intellect and its reasoning power, the knower and its knowledge? I only know that I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. One cannot divide what is indivisible or assign indivisibility a description. Incarnating out and involving back in is senseless to the ever-stationary Brahman. Being originless, it has no past. Being eternal, it defies non-existence. And so you see, I've realized I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So these three verses are what we want to look at today, and we can jump right into them with this chart about the word Om. As he starts out, as you saw and heard, that stillness and vibration dissolve away into Brahman. So we might want to look at one of the eternal principles of Vedanta and yoga and everything down to Buddhism, because the Buddhist mantras, a lot of them start with Om. So that word is just predominant there. It's kind of maybe doing it a little disservice to call it a matrix or a medium for things, but ultimately that's sort of what gets inferred when you say in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God, is that there had to be a beginning to things, but we know in Vedanta that we don't speak in terms of beginnings, middles, and ends, because those are not in Brahman. Why? Because what he just sang, it's eternal and infinite. And it's like the ethers without end. You can't find an end to them anywhere. And the ether also can even accept objects into it and not change itself. Not like air, when you introduce an object, the air in the room will move, but the ether that the air lays upon doesn't move. It's undisplaceable, they call that. So the ether is something that is the best representation on earth for Brahman. Maybe that's one reason why we have a hard time understanding Brahman, just because we don't understand ether yet. Quite often you have these 5 elements which were studied as a complex from early on in India. You move along through other countries, Middle Eastern, and then finally to the Western countries, and you're pretty much hanging out in an understanding of 4 elements. Or maybe you've divided earth into wood and metal and all of that, and you've gotten into a kind of a chemistry snit fit. And you're just studying things that are always changing. But if you had have studied the ether that didn't change, you would have had some sort of a doorway into the unchanging Brahman. So that's why I mentioned just now that Sri Ramakrishna talked about the Mahakasha, beyond the 5 Akashas, the 5 ethers. But here we are with only 1 ether, still, after all this time. Kind of makes you feel like a pygmy, doesn't it? Or some person who has just never got any training at all in anything higher than earth and its various concomitants. So this chart on Om is one thing we can look on in terms of explaining what he says here. Stillness and vibration, they dissolve into Brahman. He says, by the way, so does doubt and determination. So people have these doubts about Brahman, and then they have these determinations that it must be true, but then it's followed by doubt again. That, oh, I guess I don't believe it. Maybe I do. No, I guess I don't. So the indeterminate nature is one of the major problems of beings on earth today, is what I've found. Ramakrishna talked about worldliness as being the chronic disease. And talked one day long ago to Janggang Kantru Rinpoche, and he said distraction was the problem of this age. And then later on, as I began to help guide people towards these higher truths, I realized it was determination. That was my opinion. That was the worst problem of this age. So I'm sorry, indetermination, or doubt, if you want to put it in its opposite form. So this is what he's saying here. He's probably come upon this too. Stillness and vibration. The primal vibration is the word, Om. That vibrates all the time. But if you go into samadhi, you go beyond that vibration, even that subtlemost vibration. And if you come out of samadhi back to the word, you see the worlds there coming out of it and going back into it, and you follow that track outward, hopefully not down so far as samsara, like we talked about the last time we met for this class series, because that samsara then takes you to the unreal. That people think is the real. But nitya vastu viveka, the eternal and the non-eternal has always been one thing that they've used to teach us, that Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya, that Brahman is the only reality, and the world, when you come to it, that's not real ultimately because of its changing nature. Remember, we talked about that last week in terms of consistency and location, right? Consistency, we're different than nature. Location, we're the same, was kind of the go-to move. You don't consist of, your soul doesn't consist of material particles like atoms and all that. It consists of consciousness. And if consciousness wants to study itself, it can then see particles of something there. That's called intelligence. Those are Jnanamatras. So that's what makes you different than earth, air, fire, water, ether, insects, animals, so forth. That the human being has this flowing river of intelligence in it that's open to it. It's a nadi. It's a streaming river of awareness. Antarvestini, the yogis call it, when it's at its purest state. That's in Bhakdevi herself, in the mother. She's got this most precious space, the Upanishads say, and the Tantras too, where they want to go there and sip that nectar that's held in that reservoir, deep inside of the Divine Mother of the Universe. Very beautiful metaphors, if you want to call them that, but much more beautiful and inspiring truths of spiritual life that you want to seek for. So this is why basically you wouldn't stop just at the Mahat or just at Om. You'd want to have that experience that would open the final gateway into Brahman for you, the formless reality. And because she says in her own scripture, when everything dissolves back into Brahman, I too go back into him. I'm latent in him. Like burning power and fire, I'm latent in him. Like wetness and water, I'm latent in him. See, that's the Shiva Shakti, divine couple you're talking about there. Them also becoming united into that absolute reality without discompo, without divisions. They can't be limited down into little tiny places, you see. So when you look at Om there, you can see that everything that is of any kind of tattvic definition or consistency is there, coming off that bell that's sounding, including that very ocean itself. I don't know if you can see that me in the beach there. That's on Oahu. See, and Loke took this picture from a reef looking across the bay to what's called Keiki Beach. So this is a picture we took. And then later on I said, oh, that'll make a good one. Put a little, superimpose a bell over that, you see. And then we'll see how everything comes out, like waves out of an ocean, like sand on a beach, like trees out of a mountain. You know, wherever you look, there's this substratum of consciousness, which is unmoving. And then there's this dynamic power that's moving on top of it. And it happens not just with insentient things, like elements that don't have an intelligence in them. They move because of prana. See? But it also happens to intelligent beings when they start meditating, and mano vinasha natunaiva shuddham. They might find out how to destroy vinasha, the waves of the mind. That might not get them full enlightenment, but that will take them very close to the ocean of awareness. So you've got samsara sagara, you've got jnana sagara, and you've got ananda sagara, right? You've got the ocean of water, you've got the ocean of suffering, samsara sagara, which is the waves of suffering people. And then you've got jnana sagara, you've got this wisdom that I'm talking about. It's an ocean of pure intelligence. And then you've got this ananda sagara, which is the ocean of Brahman. Without shores, boundless, infinite, cannot plumb the depths of it, kind of thing. So think about that when you just look at this beautiful ocean here in Hawaii, which we could get to in about 2 hours if we jumped on a plane here and flew across the bay between here and Maui and Oahu. So taking the bell there and putting on top of that, and then assigning all these tattvas to it was a lot of fun, actually. You can see there, remember what we're talking about here in terms of the Avadhut's teaching, is that stillness and vibration, they all go away in Brahman. So all of these things go away as they come back to the first uttered word, Om. But then what we're talking here is they come out of Om too. This is like there's a stillness now, right? And I start speaking, and there's, from the source of the speaker come out these vibrations, and they come across the ether and they hit the ears, and there's hopefully something in them that attracts the hearer, and that for us that would be intelligence. Are those words carrying intelligence with them? I hope so, because that's what I'm here for. See, so I want to hear this wisdom and then imbibe it and take it in, just like that nectar. In the Antarveshtini, it's closer I can get to that and sip it, quaff it, then the wiser I will become. See, the more in the know I will become of the whole cosmic process, and then open the gate to the non-dual Brahman and have samadhi. I'm quoting Shankara. Have samadhi, he says in the Vivekananda. he says a beautiful sloka, and then at the end of he ends it with, and so have samadhi. So it sounds a lot like he's getting ready for the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, who came to have samadhi in front of us. In fact, he came to have samadhi in front of the whole world now, if the world will look. Because that was called attention to by Vivekananda coming to America with the Vedanta in 1893. And then he talked about his master, and all of a sudden you've got this opening to this new avatar they call Kali Yuga avatar, that who said, and it might even be here somewhere, here, let's read his top quote because it's naturally come up. He says, "It has been revealed to me that there exists an ocean of consciousness that is without limit. From it comes all things of the relative plane." All these things coming out. "Therefore, I give the illustration of the bell's sound, tom, or T-A-M, or T-O-M. The strike of the bell is like the falling of a great weight into the ocean. Waves rise on all sides." Like, think about it, a huge meteor coming out of the sky and hitting the Pacific Ocean. You know, what that would do, what a spectacle that would be, externally speaking. But spiritual speaking, the relative rises from the absolute. The causal, subtle, and gross worlds and bodies appear out of the great cause, or great cause would be Om. The waking, dreaming, and deep sleep phases arise out of Turiya, another way of saying it. So the fourth state of consciousness beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which we will look at in a minute, rise out of that, of Turiya, that fourth state, that great cause. And just as millions of Brahmandas, that means worlds, rise in the ocean of Chittakasha, they merge in it again. The Leela merges into the Nitya. So, you know, if you were to take just this one saying out of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you'd have 4 different philosophies to study there. He mentioned in one paragraph, that's how beautifully integrated all the darshanas of India are in Sri Ramakrishna. Because we already know Sarvadeva, Devi, Swarpara, all the gods and goddesses have also been concentrated in him. So now you can be a worshiper of Ganesh, Krishna, Shiva, Ram, whatever, and still you can say Sri Ramakrishna's name and it will be inclusive of all the deities. Sarva, Deva, Devi, all the gods and goddesses are there in him. In the same way, all the religions are there in him from the universal standpoint. So, and all the philosophies then also there in him, Vedanta, yoga, and so forth. So you can see there on the left-hand side of the bell, there are the lokas. Brahmaloka is the last one, but if you start, you know, you're starting near the bell. So if you're coming from the causal world, Brahmaloka, Taparloka is the next world, then Jnanaloka, then Maharloka, then Svarloka, Bhuvarloka, and Burloka. That's where we are. You could put a little arrow from me, you know, over to there. See, you are in Burloka, walking down a beach right now. So these 7 worlds have been a long-standing study, been there for a long time in India. And so it's good. There may be descriptions in other countries or other religions of things like this, 7 this, and so forth. But this has been so long-standing that it's easy to refer to it now, that anyone can come and understand what's inside of them, and that all the worlds, that the kingdoms of heaven are within you, if you want to put it in Jesus's words. Anyone can now come and just say, oh, look at that system that's been there for thousands of years and many ages. And everyone, millions of people are accepting it as the best way to describe what's external from Brahman. How nature manifests itself out of a word, if you want to put it that way. So, you know, reciting each one of these words, right on down to Bur, then Lord Brahma projected the worlds. See, he had all of these seed bijams in his mind. All he had to do was think them, and they began to manifest. Because Sri Ramakrishna said, when I first saw the word, I saw all the worlds coming out of it, and I saw them going back into it, and no time was passing. That's just like one of the most profound sayings I've ever talk about, trying to describe something like samadhi, but trying to describe the world the word is even harder. But look how he did it. When he saw the word, he saw that it was beyond time. So we're not thinking that way. It has to be in time. It has to be made of matter, and it has to vibrate somehow. In order for me to even believe in it at all. But the reason that we don't know about these worlds and these lokas and these akashas and all of these other assignments to the word is that we're caught in time. My teacher used to always say that. Peace and blessings be upon him. Says you're still caught in time and space. So there you are, his first word, niskampa, right? Shall we just stop and meditate on that word for a while and try and break through this concept we have in our heads that we're somehow trapped in space and time? Or realize that because we are trapped in space and time, we've convinced ourselves of it. That's why we don't know about these other worlds outside of us. Except where? Here. In waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So I'm going to jump right there. Goodbye, Om, because we could go through this chart and it would take the rest of this class and more. But basically, you've got all the worlds. We at least said that much coming out of that sound. What is it? Tom, T is the striking of the bell. O is the sound that comes out from the bell and sustains for a while, finally dissipates, and Om is the dissipation back. That's like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva does, you see. That's how they, how everything comes out of this primal vibration. And because it's beyond time, they have to call it something special. So they say it's the unstruck sound. And number two, they always say it strikes itself. And so those are two ways people who are still thinking about cause and effect, as being the ultimate truth, which it isn't, but it's something that karma, they have to get beyond. Philosophically speaking, that's the first things they'd tell you to try and get you over this limited way of thinking. So basically, it's unstruck and it strikes itself. So kind of a conundrum, no doubt. Across here, you see all the bhutas, all the beings that come to the worlds. And then you see TOM itself, and then you see the bodies connected with it, and the 5 akashas. So just don't want to do a discredit here, but we want to move on to this class to go through his verses. So he says, stillness and vibration, doubt and determination, they all go back and disappear, dissolve into the ultimate reality called Brahman. And then the next thing he says is, even the waking state and dreaming state dissolve away there. And so that's what here, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, you see, and Turiya beyond it. Remember, we just read, Sri Ramakrishna says, it all rises up out of Turiya after deep sleep, dreaming, and waking. So this is how waking, Jagrat, Swapna, dreaming, and Sushupti, deep sleep, dissolve into Turiya. And then out of Turiya they come. So the human being has these 3 states of its consciousness, and if it knows them, then it can sport in these 7 worlds without risk, right? We've had that teaching before. If it doesn't know them, it remains nishkampa. It remains restricted only to the physical world in the waking state. So people cannot relate to anything else than that, philosophically. I'm a physical being living in a physical world, and my waking state's the only thing that's real to me. And so dreams are phantoms of your imagination. Deep sleep doesn't even occur that you even went into it, so it's not something that you'll be looking at. But the philosophers look deeply at it. They said, what happened to me in deep sleep when that ego went away, that ego that was such a problem there in waking, and it then got itself into different dreams and nightmares in the swapna state, and then said, then went into deep sleep and everything went away, you see. So that's what you have when you look at the Advaita Vedanta's look. So let's go on with this verse when he says, waking and dreaming state disappear also into Brahman. Now that we've had the word as the explanation for how stillness and vibration both disappear into Brahman. You can see all stillness, and then the word strikes itself, it occurs, and Lord Brahma and Vishnu and Lord Shiva take it and take it and make it into worlds, see? And then all the way down to these akashas, and beings are then some beings are meditating on this and seeing how it happens. They're interested in how this vibration will turn out. And they're also interested in how to make sure that I don't get caught in it, like the samsaric wheel we had last time. And I can move back into my source as an observer or as a witness of all of this. Well, that's why it segues nice into this chart about waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, again, which we will go through quickly. What does the waking state appear to us as? It turns us into an individual. And so I won't explain the whole waking shape. I'm going to make by associations. What does the dream state do to us? It makes us into a dreamer. So in waking state, we're an enjoyer. In deep sleep state, we're a dreamer. In waking state, the physical universe is our location. In dreaming state, our mental realm is our location. Very nice, because then if you want to know where you go in sleep tonight, you can tell your children now. You go into the subtle realm, you go into your mind. That's where heaven is, my child. Be careful, hell's also there. Until you know how to navigate it. So heaven isn't somewhere out there and hell's not somewhere below you. That's just superstition, metaphoric at best. But now you know that when you go to sleep at night, you go in, you open up these nadis or nerve passages, and you go into your subtle body. And this is Gaudapada's way of explaining these three states of consciousness, and the Turiya, which is beyond it, that Sri Ramakrishna mentions here, and this chart also mentions. All right, so those two we took up. Then how about back to the waking state? In the individual, we're called Vishma, and in the dreaming state, we're called Taijasa. So Vishva means, the one who's aware of an individual existence. Taijasa means one who's aware of intelligence, is becoming aware of intelligence, is beginning to shine. Taijasa, you see. So it's beginning to realize that there's more than just a waking state there, that it is alive in the dream state. And that's a subtler state. It's not a imagination necessarily. Why Ramana Maharshi called it, right? Dream number one, dream number two. You got to awaken from both of them. So you can see that you're dreaming in a certain way out here with solid objects, and those solid objects are made out of your thought. So when you go back into dreaming tonight, you're taking them solidity and liquidity and all that away from them, and you're putting them into the dream state, and the objects are of a dream nature there. You have dream water, dream earth, dream fire, dream air. You're a butterfly, you see, flying in the dream air. I had a rebirth as a butterfly, and people laugh about it. But it's actually not to be taken literally that way. It's be taken in states. That consciousness can assume forms. One of the first things we had at our retreat, when we were talking about, you must know that consciousness can take on different forms. One of the great statements we studied last weekend. So let's keep with the dreaming and waking state, because that's all that he mentioned here. He says, the duality of virtue and vice, morality and immorality as well, even the waking state and dream state dissolve away there. There with a capital T means Brahman. And he follows it by saying, I am that Brahman. You are that Brahman. And a couple of verses later, he changes the I to you, because he's wanting to give you this transmission, see, That I'm saying this and you're going, wow, you're so great or something, or wow, you've mastered this, or you've had this great epiphany. Then he all of a sudden shifts and says, you too are that Brahman. So he's trying to convince you to get beyond this kampa and samsara and all these things which he has to mention by way of words, so that you realize your true nature and waken up from the dreams. And deep sleep will be the sign of that, called sushupti, a very powerful word because it's also a type of samadhi. Deep sleep is a kind of samadhi. When it's there, they call that nidra samadhi, sleep samadhi. So it's deep sleep samadhi, not dream samadhi or waking samadhi. Those are much grosser and they vibrate heavier and they have more kampas in them because they have more sections in them, more places the consciousness can go, like water flowing in down little rivets, into channels, into pockets of earth. You can't, it's just flowing so fast you can't see them all do that. Consciousness likes to do that. Wow, look at that. It's like kids getting into a new house. I want this room, I want that room. So this water consciousness just flows into these worlds when they become available to them. So you would do that every night. You see this dream castle open up to you, I'm going there, and you flow into that, and you explore as many of those rooms as you can with your liquid consciousness, you see. It's not limited anymore to a solid earth body, that you can't go into some of them because the door's locked, you see, or they won't let you in. See? So in other ways, your consciousness becomes able to pass through solid objects. And the only probably concept people have of that is a ghost. Oh, it can pass through walls. But far beyond that, there's this ability of consciousness to not only pass through walls, but create the walls and dissolve them with the power of the word. This is what the great souls are doing all the time. And they can penetrate your dream, like Buddha, the dream of the ancestors, and try and wake them up. Don't you see you're on this wheel of samsara? Here, I'll show you your last lifetime. Krishna to Arjuna, right? You only remember one of your lifetimes, Arjuna, but I remember mine. He's trying to awaken up to the fact that if he remembered his past lifetimes, then he would be a whole person again. He'd be aware of his entire soul and all the powers in it, rather than just this one little niskampa world he's in, where he's just got a body and he can just go from the battlefield to his castle and back again. And with a bunch of demons warring with him outside, you see, and a couple good friends who are his brothers, Pandava clan and all. But so wake up beyond that into this greater reality. And spiritual awakening is called, and it's just the beginning. And then after the awakening, as I was saying earlier, you can't just prance around and pomp and dress well and try and pull the wool over people's eyes because you're somehow holy. There's a lot more to attain after that. And if you're still attached to possessions and powers and pleasures, the 4 Ps we call it, then you're no teacher at all. You're kind of a buffoon dancing around in front of people on the stage. So basically you have to have realized these and connected them. So Pipalada says somewhere here, is it not here, but in another chart, those who come to the physical world, they realize A. Those who master the dream state, they realize U. Those who come to the deep sleep side, they realize M. What's it spell? Come on, let's get in a chant about it and go out and walk through the neighborhood around here. Say, what's it spell? Om. What's it spell? Om. We'll get everyone chanting it, and then they'll go home and say, what was that queer thing that just happened to us in the waking state? And maybe they'll invite us into their homes, and we can explain to them the word in its full reckoning. So I'm taking you through just these two, as I'm saying, because that's what's in his verse. So beyond that, then, the last thing to say there is, yes, that is the dream state, and that is the waking state, those two. I think, and you can look at this chart in Footfalls of the Indian Rishis, that book we have out now, if you like, and call it up. Or you can look at this class later on and, push pause and study it. I won't go through it all, but we should really take a quick look at Sushupti, because that's the doorway into Turiya Samadhi, and you go through it every night. So you go into this deep sleep, and you come out not aware of what you saw there. But if you ask your friend, how'd you sleep last night? Great. It's probably because he had gone into deep sleep. And if you ask your friend, how'd you sleep last night? And he said, not very good. I'm restless. I'm tired. He probably didn't go into deep sleep very long. He probably dreamt. And so he spun his wheels for hours. My 8 hours sleep was like, was 8 hours of rajas. This driving the world was 8 hours of fear, hope, doubt, indetermination, right? Those all disappeared for the Avadhut, because the next thing he says is the waking state and dreaming state also disappear there. So when he talks about morality, immorality, vice, virtue, and doubt and determination, isn't it pretty obvious then when you look at it that those are the things that go on in people's waking and dream state? They experience in the waking, they take them into dream with them, and they come out a nervous wreck. Gaudapada uses that here. People who do not, so I'm back to what I was saying about the Rishi Pipalada, those who do not connect the A with you and the AU with them, they become nervous wrecks. And they wander the worlds, these worlds, these three worlds, they wander the worlds without ever knowing themselves. So back to our samsara chart last time we met for this series, right? That's what we're trying to say about people not understanding, if you want to jump to the chase, that nature's inside of them. It's not outside of them, and then they go and get born in it. It's all the wrong orientation. It's inside of them, and they select their bodies and they select things, and that's kind of what I want to go to next, if we can have the time for it, is this whole palette of consciousness, how souls that are learning, like say Arjuna on the battlefield, he'll go home after the battle's over as the victor, and he'll think to himself, gee, Sri Krishna showed me that he was God. Number two, he told me that I had other births. And these were told to him on the battlefield, so these are going to stick in his mind. Every time he sees violence, every time he sees evil, every time he sees chaos, he's going to think of Sri Krishna on the battlefield, right? So this is the positive thing about negative things that happen to you. If they happen to you as you're seeking in spiritual life, they'll stick with you. If they happen to you just in the world, they'll betray you, see, and you'll fall into hell. You won't get deep sleep. So in the midst of seeking, negative things happen to you, that's good. In the midst of non-seeking, they happen to you, that's not good. See, that's not good. Because that's where doubt and indetermination will come. But again, what I'm saying here is they're gone for him. He dissolved them back into Brahman. So let's look at Sushupti quickly so we can understand it a little bit. Its view is a non-comprehension of reality still. So it doesn't really, in deep sleep, it doesn't really know Brahman. It's like, that fish that got released into the lake, it's going to take a little while to realize what happened to it. It's got to explore the shores. It's got to see there are bigger fish there, maybe. So in that way, when somebody goes into deep sleep and masters that state, which is kind of rare, they're going to have to know what happened to them when they left waking and dreaming behind. And this is death. This is why people don't realize what happens to them for a long time after they die. The soul is stunned. It's in fear. It's in indetermination. It has doubt when it passes. So it's just like going into deep sleep blind. It's like that fish going into the lake without any preparation whatsoever. And so people get scared and they turn off, and then they can't paint a picture of their next lifetime very nicely. Isn't it obvious? Because people are coming back here suffering. They're coming back here ignorant. They're coming back here with evil intentions to hurt others. They're coming back here to pull the wool over other people's eyes in the name of spiritual growth. I'm repeating this subject because of what I have been seeing recently in terms of beings who are supposed to be teaching the Dharma, and they're not keeping the ideal up. They're not keeping the ideal high. So, all of this to say, Sushupti is not samadhi of a conscious kind yet. It's not like nirvikalpa or something, or nirvana. But back up to the top there, deep sleep is the individual is in pragya. That means a kind of wisdom. In this case, it would be a kind of veiled wisdom. And state that it's in is the knower, whereas down below we saw it was the dreamer in the dream state, and in the waking state it was the enjoyer. So you've traded in enjoyment and dreaming for knowing, basically, is what's being said here by Gaudapada. I don't want to be just the enjoyer anymore, or I got tired of that. I want to awake from dreams, I got tired of that. I want to be the knower, that sounds better. So teach me. And the locale there is the causal realm. So you're talking about worlds that start to transcend Bhur, Bhuvar, Swahar, and these others. You're talking about worlds that would only coincide with something of a very high nature, like the causal realm, where things were originally caused, right, is the meaning. You'd have to go back to a cause. Isn't that what he said here? A great cause? So he went back inside his meditation to a great cause. Call it Om, call it the Trinity, whatever you want to use, whatever word in whatever period of Indian philosophy, the idea is clear, that you're going to a causal state where things that are trailing after it cannot go. See, like your ignorance. I left my ignorance behind. I'm not the dreamer anymore. I realized I was dreaming. So when you go into a causal state, the idea of dreaming starts to trail off of you, and then you look back and those strands are falling away. I don't dream anymore. Brahman never dreams. It's ridiculous to think that the Atman dreams. I'm quoting Vivekananda now. It never dreams. So you came under the ignorance that you were a dreamer, and it stuck to you. Then when you went into deep sleep with more consciousness, like say after doing the japa and meditating for a while, and then all of a sudden that dream haze that was holding on to your mind, as you strove to go into meditation deeper to a causal state, began to melt away, just like an iceberg in a flame. And those tracers went off you, and you can see them fall away behind you. You're not a dreamer anymore. Now I'm a knower. I hope I'm conveying some of the subtle beauty about that and the freedom that comes upon the soul who feels that. I got away from being a dreamer. So deep sleep does not have dreams in it. You can think of it that way if you want. It does not have waking nightmares in it either. Like, I have to go to work now, or time to cook another meal, or, I have to go to the bathroom or something. None of that is there anymore. The mechanism there is intelligence, because the mechanism here was the mind. It was dreaming. And the mechanism here was, of course, the body and senses. So you've transcended body and senses to mind. You've given them all up and gone into closer to your true nature. Mechanism there is your intelligence. That's flowing, that we were just talking about, this living intelligence. And that has you breathing better. That has you sitting better. See? That has you thinking better. Until finally, you won't accept any wooden nickels. There's no substitute for intelligence. That's my God now. Until a better God comes along, called consciousness. But right now, intelligence is now my God. Not body, senses, objects, not mind and dreams. See how beautiful this Advaita Vedanta system is, and how wonderfully Gaudapada commented on it and put all these beautiful things in it. When we end in a few minutes, I'll read the final thing to give us that final boost of inspiration from him. But we're going down Sushupti here to find out that the mechanism was intelligence instead of mind and body and senses. The condition is a subtle cause, whereas the condition before was cause and effect. Right? You couldn't escape cause and effect, either in waking or in dreaming. You were aware of doing something and having a repercussion. Good, bad, and all the dual throng. You see, you're aware of all those things. Slave is slave, caressed or whipped, not free. So freedom didn't start to occur to you until you dropped these states as your identity. See what I'm saying? As your identity. You don't have to destroy them, or they don't have to go away forever. You can visit them. That's what the Avadhut said earlier. You don't understand. You think I'm transcendent, or you think that I'm deluded. Neither is true. I'm Brahman, that's all. And here's what Brahman consists of. And in terms of that, it means that he's absolutely sure that cause and effect has fallen off him. Life and death, like a creeper, fell off my body. He said that like several verses ago. And so did cause and effect. It fell off my true body. So he's realizing his true body. See, this is Turiya. His true nature in this system. Call it samadhi or sampragyata or asampragyata or nirvana in other systems. So beautifully put, and the most weighed down with the least amount of baggage is the Advaita Vedanta, and the least amount of denominations, religious. It does keep a few philosophical elements. That's the only way it's going to proceed to convince you, is to keep these high-minded philosophical. So you're going to have to learn those. It's not that hard, though. Put it like this, right? And unlike other scriptures, most other scriptures, not like the Avadhuta Gita or Gaudapada, but when you read them, there isn't a lot of things. There's not a lot of finger holds there. There's not a lot of weights on you. There's not a lot of sandbags on your hot air, the mind of your hot air balloon, you see. So you read it and you either get it or you don't. And if you don't, you go to your teacher and he says, oh, you don't understand. He's not talking about dualities. He's referring to them as being dissolved into Brahman, but he himself is that Brahman, and this is what it feels like to be that Brahman. And beyond that, samadhi is not a feeling either. So those are one of the things that are going to have to fall away from the sentimentalized Westerner. You see, I feel it. I think I felt Mother Kundalini raising me. You kind of like scratch your head about that. See, no, you'll know it when it happens. You don't feel it. The feelings will come from emotions, and we try and get beyond those, into something more real. So you stick to the philosophical. So basically, that's about cause and effect. But the result is veiled bliss, whereas here in dreaming, the result was skewed perception. Obviously, your dreams, you don't come out of them with a lot of clarity, unless they're visions. But if they were visions, they were connected more into deep sleep. That's the thing they're not realizing. I got this revelation, some of the old ancients, in Judaism and, India and so forth. I got this revelation. Oh, that's good. Let's go a little higher now. The Indian seers would say, revelation's okay. Okay, you saw a burning bush. Here's the symbology of it. Now go beyond that. See, go beyond to samadhi, out of which all visions come. So deep sleep is sort of like almost sort of a medium between Brahman and all the worlds. Deep sleep is sort of a medium between waking, dreaming, and Turiya. The light of Brahman. See? So that's why they said it's veiled bliss, you see. It's veiled bliss. And it's not consciousness yet, it's intelligence. And so comparing those off, and finally, non-comprehension of reality is still that line of demarcation that's holding you back from having Turiya state. So you say, like, if you could put other systems overlaid here, here's where you'd have the sattva guna, you know, and sattva shuddha, so forth. Because you're feeling that bliss in deep sleep, it accords to what yoga says, is that subtle bliss is one of the, Patanjali says, subtle bliss is one of the 4 impediments to samadhi. You can see where that would fit here. Subtle bliss is one of the impediments to samadhi. The other being tamas, sleepiness, rajas, restlessness, dreaming, and cause and effect, right? Isn't it, right? Abhinivesha, you know, that cause and effect, pleasure and pain, so forth. So when those fall away, then you're standing at the apex of, I'm now going beyond subtle bliss. I'm flying higher and soaring lower, as we said last week in the 108 names of the Atman. So that's where you come into this beautiful description, as sparse as it is, about Turiya. And I think since we only have a few minutes left, that I will keep my promise there, and I'll read to you Gaudapada's out of his Karka, now that the system has been fairly laid out for you, in accord with this, how dreaming and deep sleep, how waking and dreaming dissolve away into Brahman, therefore leaving me with this feeling that, not a feeling, sorry, I should say, with this absolute affirmation that I am pure existence, knowledge and bliss, infinite like space, boundless as the sky. So let's hear from Gaudapada here, directly from his Karika. He says, there exists only Paramatman, the supreme sentient soul, who though one and all-pervading is aptly situated in 3 states of its own devising. Nicely put. So waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are its 3 states. They're of its own devising. Who else would put them there but you? It enjoys Vishva in the gross waking state through body and senses, experiences the subtle dream realms, Taijasa, via the projecting mind, and is the knower of pragya, wisdom, in deep sleep, via the intelligence of the heart. And there again, mating off the heart, loka, or chakra, you know, with these worlds of the heart. The enjoyer and the enjoyed, that one who retains awareness of non-duality, yet who knows these two to be separate, although he enjoys, is never contaminated thereby. Now, there's a non-dual rendering of enjoyment and non-enjoyment, or how to enjoy with, like Vivekananda said, exquisite enjoyment. Nobody really has exquisite enjoyment, and very rarely do they have exquisite suffering. So when suffering and enjoyment come, they should be 100% enjoyed or suffered. So you should just take them on as from this standpoint of I am invisible, indivisible like the sky. I'm boundless like the ether. So anything comes into me cannot taint it like the ether. Smoke can taint a sky, but it can't taint the ether. See, the ether is untouched, remains untouched. So that's a kind of summation of this. But now, in the final minutes, let's read this out of his Karka too. Perceiving the suffering of this finite world, one should turn to the Atman, the unborn, who is infinite. When mind enters Atman, its variances are seen as unreal, and peace descends. Variances, discompa, right? Like back to what we're talking about here. Doubt, determination. Its variances are gone when it enters the Atman. Atman is like intense concentration without end, but free of conceptualization. So thoughts disappeared, concepts disappeared, and it went into the original state of itself, like going into Om, going beyond the first vibration. It went into the light where cause and effect was not. Atman has neither destruction nor origination, bondage nor salvation, nor emancipation. That's a very good, see. Oh, I'm bound, so I'm going to get free. Now I'm emancipated. Atman didn't have any of those three in the first place. So that was you having those. Oh, I'm bound now, see, to the waking state. Oh, now I'm a little bit freer, but I'm dreaming, and I wake up back to being bound again, you see. Now I'm emancipated into deep sleep, right? But then I came out of those two and came back to dreaming and waking. So deep sleep was fine, but it didn't last. So he's talking in that way, beyond bondage, liberation, and emancipation. That is bondage, liberation from that bondage, and then liberation from both the idea that I'm bound or I'm free. This is Advaitic language at its best. And my teacher taught Gaudapada it. Even when he did it, he'd start off his talks. I salute Gaudapada because he was an illumined soul. He would say that several times in our hearing. So it has neither destruction, nor bondage, nor salvation, nor emancipation. This is the highest truth. In its dynamic phase, it diversifies entities. Those few who recognize Atman's envisionings perceive its beauty everywhere. For them, no difference between Jiva and Atman exists whatsoever. Thus, seers declare, non-duality alone is auspicious. From Gaudapada's Karika. Jnanamritam samorasam gaganopamoham. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Mata Shama Sundari Ramachandra Pituge Jagadamba Bhavatarini Utirile Navade Agahana Krishna Saptami Punita Guruvar Hua Sharada Kaparama Karunamaya Avatar Karunamaya Avatar